When I was a boy, I wore a POW MIA bracelet like this one. We got them at school, and mine had the name of Lieutenant Robin Gatwood, Jr. His plane was shot down in Vietnam on Easter Sunday, April 2nd, 1972. Robin Gatwood was from my hometown of Hickory. He was the son of a music professor at Lenoir College. I was just 9 years old when his plane was shot down. I didn't know him or his family. It would be some years later that I started wearing that bracelet. There were at least 2 books written about the plane that he was on. There was a movie called Bat 21, after the plane's call sign. And the books in the movie tell the story of how courageous rescuers were able to locate and save the plane's navigator in the largest search and rescue mission of the war. The navigator had managed to bail out from the plane, but the rest of the crew was listed as missing in action. As a child, my understanding of the POW MIA bracelet was that I was supposed to wear it until Robin Gatwood came home, and that my wearing it would help him to come home, would help that to happen. Sadly, to this day, Robin Gatwood and the other 4 members of the plane have not been accounted for. They've been declared dead, although nobody really knows exactly what happened to them. Robin's father wrote President Nixon and anybody else that he could think of who would help, but he died not knowing for sure if his son was dead or alive or a prisoner. The bracelet that I thought would bring him home didn't work to do that. I long ago quit wearing it, and I don't know where it is. But I never stopped wondering what happened to Robin Gatwood. And as an adult, I made 2 trips to Washington, D.C. to do research in the POW MIA files there, gathering information about the flight. I found a Vietnamese newspaper clipping about the crew that had quotes from the crew that fired the surface-to-air missile that had brought down the plane. I found Robin's name on the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. I made rubbings of it. I met with Army officials and wrote to our local congressman and met Robin's brother and mother and interviewed them and met his son, who was just a baby when his father's plane was shot down. Near the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, I saw a kiosk that had bracelets like the one that I had worn as a child. And it so happened that of the handful of bracelets the vendor had that day, one of them bore the name of Robin Gatwood. I bought it on the spot. It's the one that I'm wearing today. It lists him at the rank of captain. The one that I wore as a child said lieutenant. He was promoted while he was still missing, but before he was declared killed in action. And so I wore this particular POW-MI bracelet while I worked on stories I wrote about Robin Gatwood. And all of that changed my life in a lot of ways. The stories got me noticed and hired by a bigger newspaper. And I found an editor who was more understanding than some of the people I'd had before. They thought that it would be fine there for me to spend some of my off time taking classes. Some of the others had told me no before. And so that began a journey that 6 years later of my classes had me graduating from seminary and then coming here. And as we observe Memorial Day this weekend, I'm reminded of people like Robin Gatwood. Memorial Day is not just a chance to take a mini vacation or have a cookout. It's not even intended as a general patriotic holiday. Memorial Day is the day to remember the men and women who died while serving in the armed forces. Memorial Day is not an official observance of the church, but it happens that the lectionary text for today is about a soldier, the Roman Centurion. The Roman Centurion would have been, or should have been, an enemy of the Jews. The Roman occupiers were hated by the people, and yet this Roman soldier who commanded 100 troops was a friend. The centurion built the synagogue there in the little fishing village of Capernaum on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. I think it's fascinating that if you were to go there today, you could still see the foundation stones of that synagogue. And Capernaum was the home base of Jesus during the years of Jesus' public ministry, when he was teaching, preaching, and healing people in Capernaum and throughout the region of Galilee. And Jesus taught in that synagogue there. And it was in Capernaum that Jesus healed the mother-in-law of Simon Peter. And it was in Capernaum that Jesus healed the paralytic who was lowered down through the roof by his friends. It was in Capernaum that Jesus healed the servant of the centurion. The centurion, who should have been an enemy of the Jews, was instead a friend. And so it was that when his servant, whom he valued highly, became ill and was close to death, the centurion sent some Jewish leaders to ask Jesus to heal the servant. Luke tells us when they came to Jesus, they appealed to him earnestly, saying, "He is worthy of having you do this for him, for he loves our people. And it is he who built our synagogue for us." And Jesus went with them. Jesus didn't tell them that the centurion was an enemy and that he would not help him. The centurion was humble as well. Jesus wasn't far from the house when the centurion sent friends to tell Jesus, "Lord, do not trouble yourself, for I am not worthy to have you come under my roof. Therefore I did not presume to come to you, but only speak the word, and let my servant be healed. For I also am a man set under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my slave, do this, and the slave does it." The centurion, who had compassion, who was humble, recognized the power of Jesus. And so he had faith. And it was this Gentile, this supposed enemy of the people of God, who overcame the prejudice of being a Roman soldier in Galilee and recognized the power of Jesus, the authority of Jesus, and had faith. And those are some of the lessons of the centurion. Have compassion and overcome prejudice. Be humble and have faith. One of the reasons that I've thought about Robin Gatwood this Memorial Day weekend, as I do every year, is that President Obama visited Vietnam this past week, part of a normalization of relations that has been going on for more than 20 years with our former enemy. And as the president was there, 3 Americans who fought in the war, John Kerry, John McCain, and Bob Kerry, published an editorial in the New York Times titled, "Moving On in Vietnam, but Remembering Its Lessons." John Kerry, the Secretary of State, a former senator, commanded a river patrol boat, a very dangerous job during the war. And John McCain, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, was a POW for 5 years. He was offered a chance to be released ahead of his fellow prisoners because his father was an important man. And when he refused, or after he refused, to go home early, he was tortured repeatedly. He was a hero of the war. Bob Kerry, a former Democratic senator and governor of Nebraska, is a Medal of Honor recipient for his mission as a SEAL during the Vietnam War. This joint column by these 3 highly decorated veterans, 2 Democrats and a Republican, offered 4 lessons that they found from the war. The first, they said, is not personal to us, but a principle that applies to all who wear the uniform. We must never again confuse a war with the warriors. Americans' veterans deserve our deepest respect, gratitude, and support whenever and wherever they serve. They spoke of lessons about being honest, about leaders being honest with Congress and the American people, and about exercising humility and assuming knowledge about foreign cultures. A fourth and final lesson of the Vietnam conflict is playing out before our eyes, they said. That with sufficient effort and will, seemingly unbridgeable differences can be reconciled. The fact that Mr. Obama is the third consecutive American president to visit Vietnam is proof that old enemies can become new partners. Old enemies can become new partners. What is so sad is that all the turmoil and suffering and misery and death happened at all. And time heals wounds so that former enemies become partners. That's a lesson that we've seen play out. But what if we could reap the benefits of time by avoiding the turmoil and suffering and misery and death at all? It was this same week, this past Friday, that President Obama became the first sitting president to visit Hiroshima, where the destruction caused by the nuclear bomb dropped in 1945 was so extensive and devastating that deaths there are estimates, because we don't really know how many people died. There were an estimated 80,000 people died in the blast. The injury and radiation that came afterwards meant that somewhere between 90,000 and 166,000 people died as a result of that one bomb. And yet today, Japan and the United States are allies, as we are allies with Germany. The distinguished gentlemen are right that old enemies can become new partners. What if we could follow the lesson of the Centurion, the lesson of Jesus, and simply say that enemies should be no more? Enemies can be our partners. What if we could get rid of the conflict to begin with by seeking peace and understanding? The experience has shown us on a global level that decades from now, the wars and sufferings will be largely forgotten except as history and in the hearts of the people whose families suffered so much. That nations that once tried to destroy each other will be seeking to sell blue jeans and iPhones to one another. What if we could skip the war altogether and go straight to peace? Imagine the money that could be spent on schools and medicine and food for the hungry. And we may not have the influence on a national or international level to decide what nations do except through our vote, through our active participation. But nations are made of states, which are made of communities, which are made of individuals. And our community here will mirror our actions. And our sin is that instead of forgiving people or seeking to understand them, we take the slights of day-to-day life and we fan them into heated disputes. And we create and nurture grudges. We see how others are different than we are, and we forget that they have parents who love them, brothers and sisters whom they care about, the same human wants and needs that we have. What if we refused to have enemies? What if we turned the other cheek to those who have hurt us? What if we seek to tamp down our own anger when people offend us? What if we accept differences not as markers that people are not like us, but as signs of God's great creativity and abundant love? The centurion was, on the surface, an enemy of Jesus, a representative of the soldiers who would one day torture and kill Jesus on the cross. And Jesus could have refused to meet with him, or he could have said that he should show me the proper respect and come to me. Instead, Jesus went to him. And we have all sorts of people in this community who don't want to be part of this church. I've often thought that if all the people that you know who don't come here, the husbands who stay home, and the sons and daughters and friends of yours who don't come, if they all came, what a crowd we would have. Some may not come because they think they are too busy. Some may have problems with drugs or alcohol. They're ashamed to come. Some think that they're too smart. We're a bunch of fools. There are all sorts of reasons that people make for avoiding church. People grasp at excuses sometimes. I'd like for you to get them to come to church, to talk to them, and for them to be here. But the centurion shows us that God works in people's lives even if they won't come here. And we need to remember, as Jesus did, that there is a world of ministry beyond the synagogue. The church does not own God. God does not belong solely to the church. We couldn't keep God contained within these walls only for ourselves if we tried. The church belongs to God. And God's love and power are sweeping across people's lives here and outside of here. I hope that God is moving in the life of your loved one who refuses to come here. And I hope they do come. Because the church is the place where we remember stories like the one about the centurion. The church is the place where we recognize and celebrate all that God is doing among us. The church is the place where we encourage each other when we're feeling as if the world is against us. And we strengthen and nourish our faith during our worship and community here. Our sobering reflection together as a community, and even on Monday, on Memorial Day, reminds us of those who have been lost. And may we be recommitted to doing what we can to seek peace, both in our own lives, in the lives of our community, and in our nation. After Memorial Day on Monday, I'll likely remove this bracelet. It's just a personal preference. I don't like to wear jewelry other than my watch and wedding ring. I just keep banging into things. I keep this bracelet in a little treasure box where I keep a few childhood things, a magnifying glass and a little car, a prize I got from a cereal box. And I know this isn't the same bracelet that I wore when I was a child, but that's how I remember it, so I'll put it back in my treasure box. But more importantly, I remember Robin Gatwood Jr. And I remember Mr. Gatwood, Robin's father, talking about how his son had been cheated of so many things. He was declared dead, although no one really knew if he was dead or not. His wife remarried. It's been 44 years now since his plane was shot down. The second missile that hit it exploded right where he was sitting. And I've come to believe, although I don't know for sure, that he likely died the day his plane was hit. But not knowing remains painful for his family. Behind each name on the Vietnam Wall is a story. There's a story behind each person who died while serving in the armed forces. And we do well to remember the lessons that they taught us, the lessons the centurion taught us, the lessons Jesus taught us. May we honor those who died. May we seek to live in peace, not only with the world, but with our brothers and sisters beside us. Will you join me in prayer? Lord God, we have heard the story that you have given to us in your holy word of an enemy of Jesus who sought his help, and who Jesus helped, who was not an enemy at all, but a friend. And so we ask your guidance and your blessing as we live out our lives, that we would be a friend to those who we know, and that we would work for peace in the world. For it's in the name of Jesus we pray. Amen.